Right, greetings, African family. You know, on Monday last, I agreed that I would say a few words this morning, and with a bit of attempt during the week to prepare. And for whatever reason, that preparation, as I wanted to do it, just somehow wouldn't happen. But this morning, while we were at the other location, the burial ground, the police came to inform us that we have been granted permission to march. So happened that one of the officers was a brother that grew up in adjoining neighborhood, so we knew each other. And he seemed curious as to what it was really all about. And at that point, I understood why I was not able to prepare during the week, because this morning it's really about what has to just flow out. And while speaking to that officer and explained to him, I said, you know, what we are doing this morning is trying to preserve our heritage for our children and for generations to come. Because we understand that the designation of Bridgetown and the garrison as World Heritage Site is really about preserving the heritage for the most part of Massa. You see, we as an enslaved people, we were not allowed to own properties and so forth. So what it is that we have to bring forward from that time for our children and our children yet unborn is just what we are doing now. That African spirit that resisted and survived the Ma'afa. That is the heritage. It is not the most tangible thing that we see around. It is that spirit. That is the heritage that we have to preserve and to pass on for generations to come. And it is there at that time, speaking to the officer, that things began to crystallize. Because I remember looking last night on the internet, decided to just do a search for something on Carlisle Bay to inspire my thoughts. And what I found on Carlisle Bay was that it was named after the Earl of Carlisle, the James Head. And this is the history of Carlisle Bay on the internet. And then what it says is that it is a place where many merchant ships dock and some slave ships. And that was the end of the history. And it went on to speak of Carlisle Bay with the marine park and the great snorkeling and the swimming with turtles and all these things. And I said to myself, this is it on the big World Wide Web. If you look for Carlisle Bay, this is it. Nothing to explain that Carlisle Bay here represents the end of one horror and the beginning of another. It represented the end of that journey across the Atlantic that our ancestors were forced to make. When their home communities, their villages were raided, the terror that was rained down on them, and they were captured and held as African captives, not slaves, held as African captives and placed in the belly of a ship for 2 months on average, crossing that Atlantic where many died. And as I explained to my students, and I said, I want you to understand the horror. Because this was not a case where you can now raise your hand and say, sir, can I go to the bathroom, please? And if I tell you no, you get up and walk out. This is the time when our ancestors were shackled and chained. And the bathroom that they had was right there below the slave deck with them. They had to do everything right on that spot. It was a horrible thing where many died and were thrown overboard at death so that sharks followed these ships across the Atlantic into Carlisle Bay. And when those ships arrived here, and our ancestors are up on deck and they're getting a bath, washed off, and so on, ready to be sold, it seemed as though this was the end of that horror, that journey across the Atlantic. But soon they realized it was the beginning of another horror, where they're sold to work on plantations and continue to be the property of somebody else to do as they like. To work sun up to sundown, to be raped and abused, to be told that they're subhuman and to have almost no rights. This horror that we have labeled the Ma'afa. So this morning, when it became clear to me that what we are celebrating here, what we are commemorating really, and trying to preserve, is that intangible heritage of our ancestors that we must pass on to our children and get them to understand what it is that their foreparents went through, what it is that created this barbarian society that we're in, to give them a clear picture of what they now must do in order to take us closer to our full liberation. So I think the work must be done to put there on this World Wide Web that Carlisle Bay is not simply this big merchant bay that, yes, allows some slave ships to dock, that is named after the Earl of Carlisle, but that it is, in one sense, the end of one horror and the beginning of another for our ancestors. So that is what was put in perspective for me this morning. African Revolution. Long live the African Revolution. Long live British Empire, or the British Vampire, was founded on criminality. It was founded on slavery, slave trading, genocide, murder, rape. Britain, and I'm going to indict the British Empire, because I see myself responding to Cameron. So although Cameron is not here, Cameron is here because I'm responding to Cameron. Right? Britain is not the first of the European slave trading nations, but Britain became the wealthiest of these slave trading nations. And the super profits that the British got from the exploiting of the Africans allowed them to invest this money into the
emerging industrial revolution. So we are indicting Britain for crimes against humanity. These crimes against humanity, genocide,
Good.
slavery, slave trading. The British are a hypocritical nation
Yes.
because after the enslaved like General Busa, Nani Gregg, and others consistently and constantly fought against their enslavement, as well as seeking now to set up a plantation economy within Africa because they needed some crops to be grown inside Africa, pretended that they had some humanitarian impulse and pretending that they were now the champions of emancipation. So I'm saying the British are hypocritical, and this was demonstrated in 2007 when they made a song and dance about the bicentenary of the end abolition of the slave trade. Now, what was hurtful is that they brought the enslaved across, as my brother pointed out, in the most terrible conditions. However, more terrible conditions were in store for them on the plantations, where they sought to reduce human beings to less than a human being, to just the ability to breathe and to work, and strip the Africans of his gods, of his religion, of his culture. This experience is still very much with a traumatized people. The British paid the slave owners 20 million pounds for the loss of what they termed the loss of some capital venture, and they refused to pay those who labored on the plantation one penny. They did not even give them a piece of land. So I'm saying, given the fact that the British paid the plantation owners 20 million pounds, we're saying that a debt there that has not yet been paid. And we are asking for our reparations for that experience. Now, looking at the question, simply put, why reparations? We're saying reparative justice is needed because the British participated in the crime, and I mentioned the crime, but as a good teacher, I will re-emphasize that wrapping up for the crime of slave trading, for the crime of slavery, for committing genocide against the First Nation peoples of the Caribbean. And although we're celebrating African Awareness Month, we must spare thought